The following is a sponsored program paid for by First Alliance Credit Union. Welcome to Good Money Moves, featuring Jenna Taubel from First Alliance Credit Union and Andy Brownell. Here's Andy Brownell on Rochester's News Talk, 1340 KROC AM and 96.9 FM.
Welcome back to another episode of Good Money Moves. I'm Andy Brownell, along with Jenna Taubel, AVP of Marketing, our financial expert from First Alliance Credit Union. Jenna, welcome.
Thanks, Andy.
Last week on the program, we talked about ghost credit and zombie debt.
Yeah.
What are we exploring this week for Good Money Moves?
Have you heard of a financial product called Overdraft Line of Credit?
I have.
Excellent. Yeah. And so then you know that this can be a really kind of a game changer for anybody who is maybe new to managing their finances or just has challenges between paychecks. So we're going to talk a little bit about how overdraft line of credits work, some of the fees that might be involved, when it's a good idea to use one, when it's not. So we've got lots to cover today.
Okay. And I will say I'm very happy I have not had to use that in a long time.
Yeah.
So the overdraft line of credit subject is I know this is going to be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think this will be relevant for people who are just getting started out, because that's probably when you're actually going to use it.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, Jenna, where do we start?
Yeah, so let's just start with the basics. An overdraft line of credit, or sometimes you'll hear these referred to as an LOC. It's a type of financial tool that gets linked to your primary checking account. And essentially what it does, it acts as a backup if your account balance drops below zero. So when you run out of money in your checking account, instead of getting hit with overdraft fees or having your transactions declined, in the case of the credit union, right, it then automatically pulls the funds from your overdraft line of credit to cover the difference. So it's kind of another financial safety net, another financial tool you can use to help manage your day-to-day expenses.
Obviously, that'll be useful.
Mm-hmm.
Way better than bouncing checks, that's for sure.
Yes. Well, I don't know how many people are writing checks anymore, Andy, but
I still have a checkbook, although I admit I don't use it very often. Okay. So how does the LOC, the overdraft line of credit, actually work?
Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward. So once you apply and you're approved for this overdraft line of credit, that is something, it's considered a loan. It's a credit line. So you do have to get approved for it from your bank or your credit union. And essentially you get approved for a set limit. So typically overdraft line of credits aren't huge limits, maybe $500, $1,000, just depends on the institution and kind of your credit at the time. And it kind of functions in that way, similar to a credit card then. So then when it gets attached to that checking account, so when your account falls into the negative, that line of credit steps in to cover the shortfall. And then you end up paying that borrowed funds is essentially what you're doing. You're borrowing funds from this line of credit to ensure that your bills are getting paid when your account in your checking account falls negative. So that line of credit steps in to cover that shortfall. And then you only have to pay interest on the amount that you've used and not that full credit line. So if you have a $500 credit limit and you overdraw by $100, so you pull $100 out of that overdraft line of credit, you're only paying the interest on that $100, not that entire $500. So similar to just like how a credit card would function, you pay back the funds that you borrowed plus interest.
Sure. And this happens automatically.
Automatically, yep. It's not something that you should have to go in and move those funds manually.
And obviously the advantage to this, as I mentioned earlier, with the antiquated bounced check business, but those come with overdue draft fees, which are they pile up fast.
They do. And yeah, I mean, they can be anywhere from, $30 to $35 per transaction.
Ouch.
And depending on the financial institution and how they structure those fees. So it gets really expensive really quickly to rely on overdraft to cover those times when your account goes below negative, because there's literally nothing worse than going and buying your, $10 coffee from Starbucks thinking you've got enough in there, only to find out that coffee then cost you almost $50 because you had this overdraft fee attached to it. That's just an awful feeling. So when you're borrowing money from an overdraft line of credit, you're actually, while you do have to pay that money back, it's a significantly smaller fee when you look at the interest rate that's usually charged alongside those line of credits. They tend to be closer to like lower interest, like credit cards, so more in like the 10, 11, sometimes down to 8. Like it's a much smaller dollar amount that you're paying back in interest charges versus having to pay an overdraft fee. And this can just really save you a lot in the long run if you're somebody who really just occasionally has those close calls with your account balance, because I mean, it happens to everybody. Sometimes, you had to buy more things than you thought, or prices went up and you didn't realize it, and then all of a sudden you thought you were going to have enough and you don't. So it happens. And something that I think people don't always realize as well is that without an overdraft line of credit, if your account goes negative, your bank or credit union might still allow that transaction to process, but then again, they'll charge you that hefty overdraft fee per transaction. So it's not just a one-time fee because you fell short, it's per transaction. So if you ended up with 3 or 4 transactions going through when your account was in the negative, I don't know, like 30 times 4, it's
Ouch.
like $100 plus for accidentally overdrawing your account. So it adds up quickly. So that's where having that option of that overdraft line of credit can really be kind of a financial lifesaver when it comes to trying to manage your budget in the long run.
I imagine for somebody who's having trouble managing their money, or is just getting into this, and perhaps, their income is still in that lower range because they're just starting out. You're a young person. And these overdraft fees, I could see this could get somebody in trouble really, really fast. This could be the thing that would be the tipping point for you that creates that really downward spiral that causes you major issues.
Exactly. I mean, if to my example just a minute ago, if you had, $120 in overdraft fees plus all of the charges, even if they were small, let's say in total you drew your account $200 negative between what you were buying and these fees, that $200 gets essentially taken out of whatever next direct deposit comes into your account. And so you're now $200 short on your next paycheck, which can very much lead to this cycle of just constantly trying to get caught back up, because when your paychecks are smaller, every dollar counts and every dollar is so much more important that $200 could really set you back over and over again.
Yeah, that's the groceries you couldn't buy this week, or maybe being late on your rent payment, or your vehicle payment, or, oh man, yeah, okay. Overdraft line of credit. That is the topic today on Good Money Moves. Jenna Taubel with us, First Alliance Credit Union. I'm Andy Brownell, and we'll return in just a moment with more Good Money Moves on News Talk 1340, KROC AM, and 96.9 FM.
Good Money Moves continues in moments with Andy Brownell and Jenna Taubel from First Alliance Credit Union. This is News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96.9 FM. We're talking good money moves with Andy Brownell and Jenna Taubel from First Alliance Credit Union on Rochester's News Talk, 1340 KROC AM and 96.9 FM.
It's Good Money Moves. Jenna Taubel from First Alliance Credit Union. I'm Andy Brownell. We're talking about Overdraft Line of Credit. Okay, obviously a great tool. And it sounds like a great way to avoid those huge overdraft fees, in my view. But when should somebody actually use this, the overdraft LOC?
Yeah, good question. So I think the key to using an overdraft line of credit wisely is really understanding that it is a tool to cover those unexpected kind of shortfalls in your budget. So it can be really useful for things like a one-time emergency expense or a surprise bill. It's not really intended to be this long-term solution for regularly overspending. You still should be managing your budget to the best of your abilities. So for instance, if your car suddenly breaks down and the repair bill comes up to $600, but you only have $500 in your checking account, that overdraft line of credit could then step in and cover that extra $100 so that you're able to get your car fixed and get moving again in life, and you're kind of avoiding that opportunity for your card to be declined. And then it gives you the opportunity to then repay that line of credit over time, but you do want to pay it off as soon as possible to really minimize the amount of interest that you're accruing over that time.
Absolutely.
So I think that's another maybe benefit to the overdraft line of credit as well, is that oftentimes it's not something you have to pay back all at once, because it is that line of credit. You can make payments towards it, which again, kind of going back to my earlier example when we were talking about, if you get hit with 4 overdraft fees, you're looking at over $100 just in fees plus whatever funds you stretched yourself with for those transactions. So in this case, even if you did have to pull $200 from that line of credit, you can pay that back in increments so that you're not having to set back $200 from your next paycheck. You can kind of structure it to get it repaid as quickly as possible, but without having to necessarily put you in a worse financial position the next time you get a paycheck.
You'd still be able to buy groceries.
Yes.
So when's a bad time to use it?
Yeah, so I think, a bad time to use an overdraft line of credit is really if you are relying on it too frequently, especially for non-essential expenses, right? If you're just kind of casually shopping for like trinkets, or you're dining out a lot, those types of things where just your normal budget, you should always try to live within your means, within your paycheck. And you shouldn't use it to supplement your lifestyle, I guess, is maybe the best way to say that. So even though the interest might be low compared to other credit options, it can still add up and get out of control if you're not careful and you're not managing that tool. So if you are consistently borrowing from your line of credit, it could indicate that you have a deeper financial issue that needs addressing. And, whether that's you just need to structure your budget a little bit better. It could be that you need to take a look at how much you're spending on what and maybe cut back. Maybe you need to find a way to increase your income to help cover your day-to-day expenses. But in short, right, overdraft line of credits really should be treated as a short-term solution for emergencies and like those occasional moments of overspending, not as a cushion for consistent lifestyle overspending, if that makes sense. So
yeah,
if you're using it to cover those frequent spending gaps, it might be time to just take a step back and really reevaluate your budget and some of your financial habits, because you don't want to have to be reliant on credit to get through your day-to-day spending.
Yep, that would be considered probably a big red flag.
Yes.
Okay. Obviously, this is a service, a very useful service, but it's not free.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the fees. What kind of fees can you expect to be associated with these overdraft lines of credit?
Yeah, so while an overdraft line of credit can definitely save you from some of those hefty overdraft fees, to your point, it's not free, right? We talked earlier about the interest charges that are involved. So you'll pay interest on any funds that you borrow from the line of credit. And again, that rate varies depending on the financial institution that's extending that line of credit to you, but it's usually much lower than even credit card interest rates tend to be. So, for example, if your credit card charges a 20% interest, your overdraft line of credit might only charge 10%. So making it a much cheaper option if you need to borrow a small amount for a short period of time. As far as true fees go, some banks or some credit unions do charge an annual fee or even a one-time setup fee to have a line of credit in place. So be sure to check with your financial institution to understand any of these costs up front. It's also worth noting, First Alliance does not charge those fees compared to some other maybe larger institutions in town. We don't charge any kind of annual fee or setup fee to have that line of credit in place.
Excellent.
Yeah. And so I think another thing to keep in mind as well, though, is this is a line of credit. It's like it functions as a loan, as a credit card, right? So if you don't repay the amount you borrowed from the line of credit within the agreed upon time frame and you're not making those minimum payments, you could be charged late fees, right? Which can also add up over time. So that's where it's just important to have a plan for how you're going to repay on that line of credit as quickly as possible. And, thankfully, because those, overdraft line of credits tend to be smaller credit limits in general, a lot of times those minimum payments are very reasonable. And so it's easy to get caught back up, but it is something to keep in mind as if you're considering getting one of those. But that could be a fee you would be charged if you're not paying your payments on time. And I would just, I think like any financial tool, it can be incredibly useful, but only if you understand the terms and use it as it's intended. Overdraft line of credits are designed to help, but if it's not used wisely, just like any other type of credit, those costs can still pile up and get you into a lot of trouble if you're not managing that tool appropriately.
Okay, this begs a question. If you have the fee or the amount taken out of your line of credit, let's say I overdrafted and $100 gets pulled into my checking account to cover that. Now I owe the $100 to my LOC. Does that become a fixed loan at that point, that there's an expectation that it'll be repaid? Or I guess maybe, is there a minimum payment requirement every month?
There is, and that minimum payment is typically going to depend on the amount that you've borrowed. With I don't know off the top of my head what the minimum would be necessarily, but usually it's like minimum of $100 or $50. Again, it just depends on what that contract states. But yes, yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're talking about overdraft lines of credit today on Good Money Moves. And we'll continue learning more with Jenna Taubel with First Alliance Credit Union when we return in a moment on News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96.9 FM.
Good Money Moves continues in moments with Andy Brownell and Jenna Taubel from First Alliance Credit Union. This is News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96.9 FM. We're talking Good Money Moves with Andy Brownell and Jenna Taubel from First Alliance Credit Union on Rochester's News Talk 1340 KROC AM and 96.9 FM.
Welcome back. Good Money Moves with Jenna Taubel with First Alliance Credit Union. And the topic today, overdraft lines of credit. Okay. This is what I'm wondering. Can I consider my overdraft line of credit as, an emergency fund?
Yeah, that's a good question, Andy. Well, an overdraft line of credit can act as a temporary stopgap for financial emergencies. It really shouldn't replace a traditional emergency fund. And here's why. So an overdraft line of credit is still borrowed money. So it can certainly help in a pinch, but you are essentially taking on debt to cover those emergencies. ideally, your emergency fund should be a savings that you've built up so that you don't have to repay it over time and you're not paying more for that emergency situation because of the interest that's then attached to the debt. So, well, however, I would just say, like, in situations where you don't have an emergency fund or yours has been depleted for some reason, an overdraft line of credit can certainly be helpful as a short-term solution just to address the emergency. Just be mindful that you do have to pay it back, and you want to do so as quickly as possible to avoid racking up those extra interest charges. So I'll kind of give an example that is similar to what I mentioned earlier in the show. So if your car breaks down and you don't have enough in savings to cover the repair costs, using that overdraft line of credit could help you avoid going into deeper debt with something like credit cards, which tend to have that much higher interest rate, right? But after you've used the line of credit, your next focus should really be on paying that down and rebuilding or start building an actual emergency fund that can act as a better financial cushion for those emergency situations. Building up an actual emergency fund savings account should be the goal, but an overdraft line of credit can definitely help in the meantime if needed. So, and when you're thinking about emergency funds and building those up, a good rule of thumb is really to aim for 3 to 6 months of living expenses saved up in this emergency fund so that you don't have to rely on borrowing when these unexpected situations come up.
Absolutely. Then the overdraft line of credit becomes just something you can have on the shelf just in case.
Exactly.
Very informative, Jenna. And obviously, an overdraft LOC is a great financial tool if it's used correctly, as you pointed out, infrequently as a buffer. But what should someone consider if this is the right path for them, if they should be considering an overdraft LOC?
Yeah, so I think the key consideration is how you plan to use it or how you think you'll use it, right? If you're someone who only occasionally has those close calls with your checking account balance and you just want that safety net to avoid those overdraft fees or to just have that nice kind of buffer for those, occasional moments where things the checkbook, to your earlier example, doesn't balance out, it could be a great option. If you're using it to regularly cover gaps in your budget, like every single paycheck, between paychecks this is happening, then again, it's really a sign that it might be time to assess your spending and figure out where this gap is truly coming from, because you shouldn't be overspending every single month. That's not a financially healthy way to live your life. So that's just something to think about. If this is the problem you're having, an overdraft line of credit isn't going to fix that problem for you. Right. It might actually make it worse because now you have this debt that you have to continue to pay on. I would just say also be sure to understand the terms. So know the interest rate, any fees that might be involved in getting the overdraft line of credit set up, and how quickly you'll be able to repay when you borrow. And I would just say, remember that the goal is to pay off that overdraft line of credit as soon as possible and get you back to a positive balance in your checking account and have no debt lingering out there. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. So
absolutely. And I'll just give an example from my prior life as a much younger person. And this goes back to the dinosaur age when we wrote out checks and we had to actually write down in a ledger what our checks were and the amount they were in order to know what our balance was, instead of simply looking at an app.
Yeah.
And it was very easy to write out a check and forget to enter it into the ledger. And then the next thing you know, when funds were getting a little bit low near the end of the pay period, that, $26 check you wrote out for a tank of gasoline and you forgot to write it down when you were in a hurry could really mess you up. And the line of credit was the perfect way to protect yourself in those situations where you went, oh, what an idiot. I forgot to write that one down. And then the next one would have bounced.
Exactly. Or somebody doesn't cash the check when you think they're going to cash it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember
They wait.
those
They
days
wait
too.
6 months, and you forgot all about it, and all of a sudden, boom, it's gone. What?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Or even now, if you use your debit card to buy maybe a coffee or two more than you remembered, and you
Hmm.
didn't check your app
Yeah.
because you're really, really busy,
Hmm.
this gives you that extra peace of mind.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right. Fantastic information, Jenna. And of course, there's a lot more to learn about lines of credit and all of the aspects involved with it, including emergency funds, as you mentioned. Where
Mhm.
can we learn more?
Yeah, as always, I encourage our listeners to visit our website at firstalliancecu.com. You can subscribe to our blog. We release new financial tips and advice regularly. You can listen to past episodes of the show at firstalliancecu.com/podcast or on krocnews.com. You can also subscribe to Good Money Moves on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, and Spotify. And as always, I encourage you to reach out to our team at First Alliance Credit Union so we can help you start making good money moves today.
That's First Alliance Credit Union, federally insured by NCUA and an equal housing lender. Jenna, as always, thank you so much.
Of course.
And I look forward to another Good Money Moves next week. This is Good Money Moves on News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96.9 FM.